Started. I'm going to get started here. Once again, thank you everybody for joining us on this cold winter Wednesday webinar. My name is Rachel. I'm a farm advisor with the Kootenay and Boundary Farm Advisors. I'll be helping to facilitate this session this evening, specifically talking about fertilizer utilization and economics of forage production. This series really is designed as a discussion series, not necessarily presentation format. It's meant to sort of get through the dark days of winter and talk about production for both forage sector and the market garden sector. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to some rich discussion. I'm going to start with a very short introduction about the soil building network, and then we're going to get right into it. For context, this Kootenay Soil Building Network, it started last year. And this project is a collaboration between the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the Kootenay and Boundary Farm Advisors and local farms. It is funded with the ministry's regional extension program. The intention behind this really is starting a soil support group to dig deeper on some common themes so that we can actually help farms really with some soil management questions and their journey, because soil management really is a journey for most farms. We've been doing sort of some broad extension events like these, like, discussions, not digging too deep on specific topics, but we also have been doing some one-on-one farm support, and we've developed some case studies. I can share that out later. They are on our website now, and these case studies really dig deep into some of the management practices for both forage and veggie farms. And those have been really rewarding in terms of looking a lot at nutrient management and trying to help farms fine tune those strategies. And this year we brought in like a whole forage focus group, and we were working mostly with farmers specifically in the East Kootenay, and really trying to understand what their production goals were and the economics behind them. And a lot of this is because without fertilizer, there is no crop, and it's often the most expensive thing the farm is investing in every year. So is there an area to talk about this further and dig deeper? There's also an opportunity to build healthy soils by promoting good plant health and basically opening the discussion so that people can ask their neighbors, ask the experts those nitty-gritty questions. And it is based on any fertilizer decision, seen as it's like one of the largest investments you're going to make on an annual basis, is about knowing your soil, knowing your crop potential, and also the potential losses of those nitrogen inputs, so that you're maximizing the production, because profit margins are so fine in this industry. And so what we would love to do before we hear from our two experts this evening, who are Lindsay Benbow, can you raise your hand? Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and Mike Malmberg. Raise your hand. Extension specialist, forage expert in the East Kootenay. He helps lots of farms one-on-one with their fertilizer recommendations. And our two sort of collaborators are Jeff Nimmo, hand up there, Ministry of Agriculture and Food. He's a regional agrologist based out of Creston, and Sarah Hirschfeld, farm advisor in Golden. She also does nutrient management planning and environment farm plan. Oh, and Jeff Nimmo has put the case studies in the chat box. And what's really useful for a discussion is for the farms on this call to just introduce yourself, say what you're growing, and if you have any specific questions that you're wanting to dig into around your fertility management or your soil building. If anyone here is comfortable unmuting themselves and just letting Lindsay and Mike specifically know who you are. Doug, go for it.
Hello, Doug Fawson in Rock Creek. We grow some corn, grass and alfalfa, some forage grain crops, peas, oats, and barley, and we're trying some fall rye and winter peas this winter. Um, just always probably looking how to be cheap and save some money on fertilizer, and whether it's better to go uh, like we're sort of been looking at buying feed rather than buying fertilizer, and just what your thoughts are on some of that and building your soil that way.
So spending it on animal inputs. Okay, yeah, good question. I'm going to write some of these down too. And I did want to tell everyone that you've done a lot with fertilizer in the past, including fertigating through your pivots. I know that you also use some the Climate Agri Solutions where you brought in some chicken manure. You've been trying everything with forage.
Yeah, we have tried some chicken manure from the coast, found it was a little expensive. Our best bang for our buck is we're liquefying 4600 and putting it on with our center pivots for like our nitrogen to boost the corn in season. Um, yeah, and I think that's a real neat way to do it. But yeah, there's always different ways to look at your fertilizer.
Thanks for sharing, Doug. How about Carl Sturzer?
Hi there. I'm from over here in the East Kootenays headwaters of Columbia Lake. We're not really growing anything. We're working on field development, reclaiming some lands. We have some cattle, and Sarah's been a big help for us on our graze management planning and our environmental farm plan, etc. So, anyhow, I'm just here for more learning than anything right now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carl. You don't, and anybody else on this call, you don't have to necessarily unvideo yourself, but if you want to unmute, go for it. And if it's silence, that's okay too.
Sorry, I just came in late. I didn't
Lisa.
hear what the question was.
Oh, just to introduce yourself and how many acres of forage you grow, and if you have, just maybe some fertility goals or questions that you're hoping to learn more about in the coming growing season.
Actually, I'm pulling back, but my daughter's going ahead with her husband, and they looking after our farm. It's 98.5 acres here in the flats of Creston. Dryland farming, but we can usually get at least 3 cuts a year. Jess has been doing regenerative agriculture with combination of sheep and beef, and is introducing uh, chickens and chicken tractor and other items like that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And how about Dwayne? I see you unmuted.
Hi there. I'm actually a neighbor of Doug's up in Bridesville area. I grow hay up here and sell that mostly for horses. I've got some irrigated, some dryland property. Same thing as Doug, try to save on fertilizer. I'm set up to do some fertigation as well through my pivot. And I also use some other soil amendments that working on building up the soil health as well. And another sideline would be my son's looking at doing drone fertilizer applications. So just kind of looking at applications regarding that as well, and how useful the fertigation is versus the or not the fertigation, the foliar application versus the granular.
Great question. Thank you for sharing, Dwayne. And Corey.
Hi, yeah, we have about 400 acres under irrigation at Skookumchuck in the East Kootenay, just down the road from Mike. Basically feeding our cow-calf beef operation. So really just here for interest, just picking up whatever we can, whatever more we can learn.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for joining, Corey. And I don't see anybody else unmuted. So last call, and we'll jump back in. Okay, so I'm going to go back to just Still remembering all my tools after there. Okay. So the way the rest of the evening is going to unfold here is we're going to ask Lindsay Benbow, forage specialist with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, to introduce. I'm going to hand over the controls to Lindsay, and she's going to introduce herself, her role, and she's going to share some slides around production and nutrient management. Some of this, she's warned, is like, intermediate stuff that a lot of you probably know, but it gives a good context to perhaps where the ministry can support producers. There wasn't a forage extension specialist for a while, but now there is, and we're stoked that Lindsay's able to come and share that. And then we can have some Q&A with Lindsay regarding her slides or with her role. And then we're going to hand it over to Mike Malmberg. And Mike he's done so much work helping producers with their fertilizer calculations. But furthermore, Mike did the ranch's cost of operating last year. So he brings a lot of economic perspective to production that I'm sure a lot of you share. And he shares a lot about, if you're going to be on the land producing, maximize that potential so that you can be profitable. So Mike brings that perspective to the story. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay. So welcome, Lindsay.
Hi. Good evening. I'll just get the screen share going here, and then that way I'll just talk after that. Hopefully I'm picking the right one. All right. And that looks all right for everyone. All right. Thanks for having me this evening. As Rachel said, I am the industry specialist forage with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. This is a new role for the ministry. We still were doing forage work, but now it's condensed into the one position. So my role is focusing on forage production, doing extension, also some projects in the background, kind of looking at it from a bit of an industry perspective. So working with some of the industry groups, including the Peace River Forage Association, BC Forage Council. And that's pretty much what encompasses the role, because the position is so new to the ministry, it's been a lot of, it's figuring out, I guess, what's happening in the industry, working, talking to folks and figuring out what's going on farm, and really developing it and seeing where we'll go from there. One of the biggest projects that I've been working on over the past while is the update to the grazing management guides. So we contracted BC Forage Council. They did the writing of it there, and so they had some contractors working on it. So it is going to hopefully be published in the next couple months. It's been a long process getting it done because it's a pretty big manual in itself. So I can share the link to it once it's up and ready to go. But that's, I guess, one of the biggest things that we've been working on. I'm part of the livestock team, so I'm integrated with the beef specialist, the dairy and poultry specialist, our agroforestry specialist, and we're I guess kind of the group that works together on livestock, and forages, as everybody knows, is really connected to that. So it was a pretty natural fit with that group. So I can pause here if there's any other questions about my role or what I'm doing, and if not, I can hop into the presentation.
Lindsay, would you mind just sharing a bit of your background and how you came to be the specialist?
Sure. So I'm from Alberta originally. Grew up in Alberta, in southern Alberta. We had a mixed farm down there. And I ended up going to the University of Alberta. My degree is agriculture business management, but I ended up having a lot of work in crops and that type of thing. So before being in Alberta, before coming out to BC, I was working as a assistant agricultural fieldman out in Alberta. So that's a pretty broad role. Working with agriculture folks and farmers within a local government. So a little bit of a different role, but it's kind of similar to a regional agrologist, which was my previous role prior to working as the forage specialist. So I was the regional agrologist for the North Okanagan, so based out of Vernon. My current position is still based out of Vernon. So my background is a lot of crops. So I did a lot of education in crops and had a lot of roles working in crop development. So that's, I guess, my focus is, or where I kind of came from to get to this role. So forage is really interesting to me, and it's still a crop, even if it's used primarily for livestock feed, but that's still a really important component of a lot of farms, so in BC.
Great, thanks. That really helps us to understand.
Any other questions?
Yeah, and we can save some of this more for Q&A too, Lindsay, but I guess
Okay.
I was wondering just in terms, the only comment I was wondering about is regarding the extent, you're one person for the whole province, but I'm wondering, like, are you working with all the different departments in the ministry to sort of like, okay, so like you work with the nutrient management, or like I'm thinking
Yeah, for
about
sure.
varieties, like if a producer was like, what forage variety should I be growing for my climate? Are you connected to like the crop development and stuff like that?
Yeah, and we also have like it depends on, I guess, what the questions are for the producer. Like it's we have connections with a lot of the other folks within the ministry, as well as there's other resources that we know outside of ministry that we can connect folks with as well, and we can determine that, I guess, with a conversation or evergreen. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll let you go now.
It's all good
for your presentation.
For sure. And with the nutrient management component too, we have a whole team that actually deals with nutrient management as well. So if there's really, really detailed questions going forward, we also have those folks we can reach out to within the ministry as well.
Great, thank you.
So as Rachel mentioned, my presentation is going over some of the, I guess, foundational information in terms of nutrient management. And then there will be a bit of a twist talking about forages and some of those considerations you want to make for forage stands. So I guess going right down, just what is nutrient management? So it's just using nutrient sources, and as some of the producers that had spoke up mentioned, different sources, including like manure and fertilizer, to optimize crop growth and just minimize that risk to water and air quality. And that's really using these different sources to maintain and produce a healthy forage crop. And as Mike's going to go into more, is also looking at those effective uses, which also consider the time or the cost of putting down those fertilizer sources. So going back in just to the 4 R's of nutrient management. So you just want to remember that it's the right source. So making sure you're putting down what the crop needs, the right rate. So applying at the right rate for the crop and based on your soil tests, the right timing so that the crop can utilize it and optimize it, use it effectively. The right place. So making sure that it is a crop available so that the crop can access it when needed. And then there's also a bit of a 5th R that they've mentioned, which is the right manner. And this would be your application method. So making sure that the method that you're using is also the most effective for your application. And these 4, 5 R's can influence each other quite a bit because the source can really affect the timing. So when we're looking at forages, so we have our non-mineral nutrients, which include carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then we go into our mineral nutrients, which include both the macronutrients, so those that are in larger concentration, and then our micronutrients. So primarily for our macronutrients, that includes our nitrogen, our phosphorus, our potassium, and our sulfur. And secondarily, you have calcium and magnesium. And then you have micronutrients, which include boron, chloride, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, zinc, and nickel. So those are the micronutrients that could have impacts on your production. And you're also going to see deficiencies in different areas, and that can really be dependent on your soil type, as well as the growing conditions that you have. So when you're looking at developing a nutrient application for your crop, you want to keep in mind the nutrient removal per ton of your crop. So there's different charts that are available. These ones are from Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation, so I can share the links to these afterwards. And these are charts that outline what your nutrient removal will be per ton of grass that is produced. And so you're looking at each of the different nutrients. So with grass, nitrogen is really the most limiting nutrient when it comes to production. Alfalfa and legumes are a little bit different. They're going to be using a lot of phosphorus and potassium, more so than they would be nitrogen, and that's primarily due to your legumes actually fixing nitrogen once they're established. All right, so when we're also looking at nutrient applications, one of the factors we want to look at is what's called the Liebig's Law of Minimum. And this is the concept that you have all of these factors that can affect your crop growth. So you're looking at your soil conditions and other growth factors. You could have other pests. You could also have just the availability of light and water, and then you also have all of your nutrients that are available. And the yield is limited by the nutrient or the condition that's the most efficient. And so essentially, if you are short in nitrogen or have not enough nitrogen available for your crop, that's really where you could be limiting the yield that you have on your crop. When we're looking at, so I'm going to focus specifically on nitrogen for this example, but the amount of nitrogen that you're going to be using is really going to depend on your plant stand composition. So that is looking at how many or how much grass you have in your stand versus how much legume, and then the mix that you would have as a mixed stand. And depending on that is really going to change of how much nitrogen you're going to apply, because your grass is going to really utilize the nitrogen, whereas the legume is going to really utilize that phosphorus and that potassium that I mentioned before. So when you're fertilizing stands with legumes with nitrogen, you could potentially reduce the legume population and favor the grass if you're putting a lot of nitrogen down. The grass will also readily respond to the nitrogen. The legume stands require the adequate amounts of your phosphorus, your potassium, and your sulfur, and include some also micronutrients that are used to fix nitrogen. When we're looking at how much nitrogen that can actually be fixed by a legume, they can fix up to 75 pounds per acre in a natural system and up to 300 pounds per acre in an agricultural system. So that's a lot. That's also an ideal situation that they'd be able to fix that much, and it'd be on a mature plant that has really established nodules. And as I mentioned before, so nitrogen is the most limiting nutrient in grasses, and it can also affect the crude protein of the forage if you don't have enough nitrogen. We also have to remember when we're applying nitrogen, it is quite mobile in the soil. So you want to make sure that you're applying it at the right time so it is available for the crop to use. And some rates that nitrogen rates that are commonly used in different areas of the province. So for the interior, on a non-irrigated field, it is usually 30 to 60 pounds of N per acre per year. On irrigated, it could be 60 to 100 pounds. But keep in mind, these are just generalized numbers. It could vary depending on what you're growing, your soil tests, and what your plant needs, as well as your soil type. So there's all those other factors that go into it. And when you're looking at nitrogen rates for alfalfa, ideally you want to keep it below that 40 pounds per acre. So this chart was based off of a study that was done several years ago, where they were doing some fertilizer forage trials. And what they were looking at was different rates and the yield that corresponded with that. And I think I mentioned earlier that when you do your fertilizer application, you want to optimize the amount of growth. And so that more isn't always necessarily better when you're looking for those yield increases. And that's really where you want to match what is needed for the crop, because you have to think about that. If you have that extra cost of application, it could be greater than the value of your yield increase. And this chart's this graph is an example of that. So you have your increasing amount of yield, and then you have the amount of N that is needed for your crop. And it gets to a point where you're going to have that yield response up to that maximum amount that it's going to respond. And then basically past that, it's no longer going to be as effective. So I'm just going to switch what I'm going to show here. So I'm just going to flip over to the Alberta Forage Manual, because they have some pictures of a study that was done looking at fertilization on mixed stands for different nitrogen or different fertilizer mixes. So a second here in the slideshow. So this were some studies that were done, and they were looking at pure stands of, they looked at alfalfa grass mixtures, and they did different trials looking at different fertilizer mixes or no fertilizers. They wanted to see what the plant response was. So this particular one was basically you're looking at doing just a fertilizer application. So you had your NPKs on your left and no fertilizer on the right. And so you can see with adding fertilizer, there was a response to the crop because they were utilizing those nutrients. Where it gets kind of interesting, so this was your grass pasture, same thing. So putting down a fertilizer blend on the left and no fertilizer on the right. So you're going to see that crop response on the left. But where it gets interesting is when you start having those mixed stands, and you have, so on the left here, this was an Alsike clover and grass pasture, this particular one. And so you've got your phosphorus, your potassium, and your sulfur on the left. And then you had your nitrogen and potassium. You had a mixed blend on the right, including nitrogen. So you can see how much stronger the response was on the grass. And so it's really indicating how much that grass uses that nitrogen. And how it can influence what your stand could look like when you add that nitrogen into those mixed stands at certain rates. And then this one was showing something similar, or similar but a little bit different blend. This one was taking out the nitrogen on a grass pasture, and you can see on the left of how that really influenced the amount of stand growth that they had on the left versus the right when you took the nitrogen out of the blend. So I always like that one because it's a nice visual of what happened in that particular study. The Alberta Forage Manual is available online, so you can download it and see more information on that. I can share the link as well for people to see. How am I doing for time, Rachel? Am I okay? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you're
All
good.
right.
Cruising.
All right.
That was great sharing those photos. It was really demonstrative of the different applications and the results. So that was great.
And I apologize for my croaky voice. I had a cold for the past couple days, so we'll see. Hopefully it lasts the whole time for you.
Okay, it sounds like a musician or something.
Perfect. I also wanted to go into, so not only what rates would be utilized and what different fertilizers could be used, but also just the consideration of just some of the other factors that can influence your nutrient uptake. So one of the factors that can influence it is the pH of your soils. So when you're looking at this chart, there's lots of different versions of this chart that you can find online. This one was from an Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food resource that they had. Basically just showing that in certain pHs, the more available the nutrient will be depending on the pH or not available. So it's just depending on how thick the band is, you can see how available they are. The other factor that can influence it beyond pH is also other nutrients. So this is Mulder's chart, which is showing nutrient interactions. So you can have nutrients that are antagonisms. So basically having them there can affect or have a decreased availability to the plant of another nutrient. But then you can also have nutrients that stimulate. So those are ones that if they're at a high level, they can decrease the demand of the plant for another nutrient. So one example of that is, say, if you look at manganese, it can have influences on iron. It can also have influences on calcium and copper. So if it's in high levels, it can influence the uptake of those nutrients. But it can have, if it's in high levels, it can also increase the need for potassium. So this one's just one to think. So when you're looking at your soil tests, if you're seeing some nutrients that are in higher levels, that could just be one thing to consider when you're building your blend, is if there could be any influences with other nutrients. Calcium and phosphorus is another one that you'll see probably fairly frequently that have interactions. And again, this chart is available in a lot of different places online, but it's just kind of one of those other conceptual things to keep in mind. So I know Mike is going to go, I think, more detail into the economics of fertilizing forages. But when we're looking at putting fertilizer application on our forage, and we're also thinking about how much this is going to cost and if it's going to be worth it, you want to think about other options. And I think someone had mentioned that, is it worth growing it, or is it better to purchase hay? Or could it be better to rent or purchase pasture? So those are some of the considerations what you want to think about. There is a calculator that I found from the province of Manitoba. And they actually go through, this one was for standing hay. So I think it was looking at whether it was worth doing a fertilizer application on this, and it walked through all these different factors, and you could plug in some different numbers and see what was worth it. Just a basic cost benefit analysis is also really important, just to determine if it meets the goals you're wanting to have for what you're wanting to get off of the field, as well as if it meets just, are you going to make money on it? Is it worth the money you're going to be spending? And as we mentioned before, precipitation and other factors can also influence the efficacy of your fertilizer applications. That's something that's a bit of not necessarily something you can control, but it's something you kind of want to consider as well. The government of Saskatchewan had a resource, and it went into some of the profitability factors that you could look at when you're looking at doing a fertilizer application. This is a short list, so probably not catching everything, but it gives you an example, just some things you might want to consider if you're going to do this application. So it'd be the profitability could be that additional yield you might get out of it. You could have just harvest efficiencies, so being able, if your stand is a little bit taller, a little bit easier to harvest. The fertilizer and the application cost. And in that, you want to also consider your equipment use, your fuel, and your labor. I know a lot of times labor is not accounted for, but it's something you definitely want to account for when you're looking at this. You also want to look at your fertilizer storage, whether you are going to be storing it on farm. Do you have the capacity to store it on farm? Is it going to cost you money to store it at the retailer? The transportation of getting it to farm. Is there any interest on that payment? And what are the current livestock or hay prices to make it worth it for you? And there's also the non-economic impacts that should be included as well in this consideration. So you could have improved livestock gains by just having that abundant, high quality forage if it has a good response. There could also be the less risk of invasive species. So if you have a competitive crop, that can help reduce the risk of invasive species. There could be less susceptibility to insects or diseases, as well as improved protection from wind and water erosion just by having that really competitive and good cover on your soil. And there's also those soil health benefits, which I think were mentioned in the beginning, that can occur with that healthy stand. So those aren't really something that you can necessarily give a number to, but those healthy plants that are well maintained can help improve the soil and potentially reduce some risk going forward. One other study that might be worthwhile looking at. So there was the beef cost of production study. And I can send the link for that one as well. This might be of interest for folks to look at. So this one is beyond just forage production, but it is looking at just some of the general costs and profits for beef operations across the province. And so it's kind of interesting to look at when you're looking, you can pull up your different area and say, okay, well, this is what this person was putting down as a cost. I think Mike was involved in that project as well, as you probably talk a little bit more about it, but it's another resource that might be worthwhile when you're looking at some of these considerations of doing a forage fertilizer application. So I will leave that there, and if there's questions for me now, or we can come back to.
Yep, Lindsay, we have one question from the chat from Devin. On the Molders chart, how does aluminum have an effect?
I will go back to that just 1 second here. Oh boy, I've messed up Zoom here.
You didn't mess it up. It's all good. Welcome, Devin. Thanks for joining. Saw your thing. Yeah, and while Lindsay finds that Molders chart, way to bring us to soil and then economics and yield trials. That was a fantastic holistic overview of many aspects. And I particularly liked the last slides, just thinking about areas of gains for a farm by maximizing a productive stand. But I'll let you take it away on the aluminum question.
For sure. So, that's why I was asking aluminum. I would have to get back to you on that one. I don't remember the interactions off the top of my head. This is one of the concepts that's always really hard to remember the exact interactions. So I always have to go back and look at it again. But I can follow up with you unless anybody else knows the answer right off the top of their head. Okay, I'll follow up with the person afterwards.
I definitely can't place it on this diagram for you and relay all the relationships off the top of my head, Lindsay or Devin. But I guess I would it's usually as pH is dropping, usually that's where you start to see that increased influence from aluminum. And it's a strong cation. So I guess just that realizing that as that's happening, it's going to be probably interacting on exchange sites that might otherwise be occupied with other cations that we usually really hope to see for crop production, like calcium or other things. So that's my only general statement on that front. But
sounds good. Yeah, I'll find I'll follow up with you afterwards on that one.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. And do we have questions from anybody else in the audience? Questions specific for Lindsay or presentation, or we can shoot it out now, or we can wait till after Mike chats. No. Well, I have a question while people think about things. Oh, here's from Jeff. Oh, he's sharing the cost of production for ranchers and study. Lindsay, I often have quite a few questions in speaking with producers, specifically about the rates. And you had that one slide that shows that specifically around nitrogen fertilizer and grass stands, there's this quite a significant response to nitrogen fertilizer until a point that you're not actually going to see much more benefit by adding more. It was kind of your comment of more is not always better. There's almost a point of saturation. And it seems as though that number is very specific to regions, to soils, and all of that. And how do producers sort of come to understand what that application rate is for their specific farm?
So it's one of those, yeah, it's going to depend on your operation. So it's really going to depend on what your soil type is, what your crop stand is, what your removal would be. It's also going to depend on, like you said, like the region, your soil type, your climate. So it's going to kind of need to look at all those different factors to get the rate. If people are wanting to say they have a soil test done and they want to figure out what their fertilizer application rates could be, we do have the nutrient management calculator that is available for folks to use. You can plug in all your information and it can give you some general potential rates. The other thing would just be working with someone like your agrologist that's on farm regularly, and they would be able to probably help you with that to determine what those rates are that would be on your farm.
Okay, great, thank you. And I know we're always, encouraging producers to do little strip trials and stuff, just so you can find that line for your own farm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And yeah, if you're unsure, do just small trials. Like it doesn't have to be a big area, but just try things out and see what works.
Yeah.
So.
And then before we hand it to Mike, I did want to see if you did have a comment regarding I think it was Dwayne had the question about pivot, like fertigation through pivots. And he was curious about like the foliar versus granular application. And I just didn't know if the ministry had done much research on that, or if you had a comment about that, because it's something that a lot of producers, more and more pivots every day in our region. And so it's an area of interest.
Off the top of my head, I don't know if there is, I don't know if we've done any specific projects on that. I could definitely look into it and see if I can find any. I think it kind of depends on, I think, again, on your operation and what works the best for you. So, but that's definitely be an interesting one, to see if there's differences. There is probably definitely some documents out there showing the differences. So I can find some of those and send them over as well.
That would be great. I feel like it's something we need to do a field day on. I know we keep getting more and more inquiries. So thank you very much for the introduction to many things to consider to optimize production in a forage stand. I am going to hand it over to Mike, who's going to comment a little more on the economics. And I mean, Mike, you could speak about so many specifics about Kootenay farming. And then we'll all stay on the line to keep the discussion going or whatever you need to get to this evening. So Mike, without further ado, please take it away.
Good, thanks. Thanks, Rachel. And Lindsay, that was an excellent discussion. The slides that you presented were very helpful, and I'm excited about them. I was just wondering, don't know if you could respond. Could you tell me what year the Alberta Forage Production Guide is that you referenced? Do you know when it was last updated?
Just give me one moment. I have it sitting right beside me and I can tell you the date on it.
Only because I just threw that link in there that I know this back, but 2009.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Thanks. That's
Thanks,
great.
Jeff.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is that I know that when folks do a soil sample and get the analysis back, there's always a question of, well, what does that mean in terms of how much fertilizer I can apply? And often with, I think, all of the labs, they provide some guidelines. And so provided you filled out your submission sheet with all of the information that you could provide, they can come back with some ideas as to what, where you could start at least to think about what sorts of fertilizer applications might be appropriate for your stand based on the plants that are there, primarily the ratio of alfalfa and grasses, and also the yield expectation. So if you expect to have a 3 ton per acre crop, you're obviously going to need a different fertilizer application than if you're expecting to have 5 ton or 6 ton per acre as annual yield potential. So you get some ideas from the fertilizer report if you've sent in a soil test to the lab, and often those suggestions for nutrient requirements for a particular stand, well, they're general. They're based on the nutrients that were detected in the soil sample that was sent, but there's lots and lots of room for refinement after that. And I guess that's an area that I'm really interested in because, well, first of all, people are always worried, well, if I'm going to spend, say, $100 an acre on fertilizer, am I going to get a return that will cover an additional $20 an acre cost, for example? So instead of spending $100 an acre on fertilizer, what if I spent $120 an acre? Would I get enough return to cover that extra $20 I spent on fertilizer with some additional return to make it worthwhile? So that's kind of the area where the rubber hits the road for me in terms of the big puzzle about, what kind of application can I make? And is it going to produce yields that are going to pay for the fertilizer plus increase my profitability? So in thinking about that problem, one of the things that producers can do to try to zero in and kind of fine tune that application rate is to put out some strips. And this is something that I've advocated for years and years, and some people do it and most of them don't. But I suggest that anytime you're applying fertilizer to your field, it's really important to provide a strip on the field where you've maybe provided more fertilizer than you were going to apply to see if there's a response, or provide less fertilizer on the field to again see if there's a response to having less fertilizer. Now, it's a bit of a pain in the ass to do that, and for that and other reasons, people usually don't. For one thing, if they have to calibrate their fertilizer spreader so that they know exactly how much more they did put on for a test strip, or if they have to slow down or speed up to get more fertilizer or less fertilizer, or increase their RPMs on their fertilizer spreader. So they'd have to calibrate their spreader to do that. So in many cases, people don't do it. But it can be as simple as just doubling the fertilizer for a strip. Now, for example, most fertilizer spreaders have a spread width of, say, approximately 30 to 40 feet wide. And so if you were to travel about 1,000 feet at 40 feet wide, that'd be approximately an acre of land, which is a decent strip to give you an opportunity. If it's 1,000 feet long, it'll be covering some different soil textures, perhaps some different slopes, perhaps, and so it gives you a good piece of ground to be able to look at and say, yeah, I can see that there is a difference in yield or crop height or crop thickness in this area where I put on this strip. So the strip should be a fairly sizable piece. If the strip is only 10 feet wide and it's only 100 feet long, you may not cover some of those differences in soil texture or slope, and so you may not actually have a big enough area to actually judge whether it looks like you've got a difference in yield or not. So it's important to make that strip big enough to be able to see what's happening, uh, and make a determination. Yes, that I did get a higher yield when I doubled the application, or no, I didn't. It didn't appear as though there was any additional yield. So make the strip large enough that you can actually sort of get a handle on it when you're doing that. And then I guess the other thing that you want to do is recognize that just because you double the strip when you're out there doesn't mean that you should double your fertilizer application. That's not the intention at all. But if you do get what appears might be an increased yield, then you can go back and refine that. So that's a cue to you that, yeah, it looks like there was an increase in yield. And now I want to see what kinds of things I can do to my fertilizer program, to the NPK, sulfur, and boron to see just where I might increase the nutrients, or possibly increase all of the nutrients, but not to a doubling of the amount, but maybe by 20% or 30%, and see if you still get a response. So it's that kind of trial and error on your own place that's really, really important in trying to refine your fertilizer application rates. If you went on with the same rate for years and years, you might find that the response would have been fairly significant if you had made some adjustments to your fertilizer program. And that's one of the things that we did with our program last year. We wanted to get some fertilizer on the ground and try to see what kind of yield response we got to an additional strip on the second cut. We were late in this season when we started, so the main crop that we had to look at was whether or not we should fertilize a second crop. And so we put on an additional 100 pounds of urea, which is 46 pounds of nitrogen, a strip of that size. We put on a strip that was lesser amounts of fertilizer, and then of course the field itself. And then this was done within about 2 to 3 weeks after the first cut was taken, and those strips were looked at during the course of the rest of the program to see if there was a response. Now, I wanted to speak particularly about one of the areas where we did see a visual response was on the Tebow Ranch. And so I don't know, is it possible, I sent that page around. Is it possible? Could that be shared with somebody? Do you have
Are you
that,
talking
Rachel?
about the spreadsheet?
It was the report on the clipping trials of this Tebow Ranch, and I just wanted to look at the last page of that to talk to people about what the responses were. If it can be put up, I can just tell you what they were.
Yeah, I can definitely bring it up, Mike. I just want to make sure I've got the right one. So I've got the spreadsheet with the clip results. I've got the feed test certificate of analysis.
Yeah, no, it's just the one that it's the clipping results, and it'll just be the last page of that 4 pages of the clipping results.
Let's pull that up. Perhaps if you want to keep chatting for a second while I pull that up.
Okay, I'll tell you about this strip. So again, we were anxious to get something on the ground that people could look at and that we could perhaps use in the future to encourage people um, to constantly make some adjustments to their standard application rates so that they can refine it over time. So on the Tebow Ranch, we applied we applied a couple of different rates of nitrogen fertilizer. One was 100 pounds of N, and I think the other fertilizer strip was half that. I'm not sure. I can't recall. And this crop, he'd taken a first cut off the crop, and the regrowth was about a foot high. So maybe about 2 or 3 weeks after the first cut. It's an irrigated alfalfa stand, and the alfalfa component was probably somewhere around 30% alfalfa, and the grass component was about 70% of the stand. And it was an older stand. I think that it had been in production for approximately maybe 6 or 7 years. So the alfalfa component was higher over a number of years, but had gradually thinned out to bring the alfalfa component down to about, yeah, that's the one. So now, how can we share that?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's being shared, so you're
Okay,
good. And
so
I
I'm
just
wondering
found
if I can get it in a bit bigger format
sure
so we
can.
can read those.
A little more?
Yeah, a little more if you can. Yeah, I think that'll be good. So the so we put on an additional 46 pounds of urea on the strip. We looked at the strip as time went on. As I said, it was about a foot high, maybe approximately a foot high when we applied the fertilizer, and that was 2 to 3 weeks after the first cut. And the Tebow Ranch decided that they weren't going to take a second cut; they were going to graze a second cut. So we looked at the stand uh, during the period of time of late July or uh, early August when the strip was put in, and um, we could see what appeared to be a difference in the strips. And I wasn't away, or I was away during the majority of August, but when I got back in September, Jordy Tebow called me up and said, "Mike, I think it looks like there's some response to that higher level of N fertilizer strip. Could you come have a look?" So we looked at it and we decided, yeah, it looks like there is a response. It was kind of interesting because we could see um, uh, it looked very definitely like there was a response when we looked at it at certain times of the day, and also when we looked at it from certain angles. So we made sure that we walked all the way around the strip and looked at it from all sides, and that we also looked at it under different lighting conditions. And that's really important if you're going to be doing some of those sort of trial strips, is to put it in a location where you can look at it frequently, and also put it in a location where you can look at it under different conditions as time passes. As a rule of thumb, I feel that if you can visually see a difference in the strip versus the rest of the stand, that difference in yield potential is probably at least 25%, just as a rule of thumb, and it could be much higher. Well, in this particular case, we did the clipping trials and looked at the difference in yield, and the fertilized strip was 2.99 tons per acre, and the unfertilizer strip was 2.09 tons per acre. So there was a difference in point 0.9 of a ton per acre on the fertilizer strip versus the non-fertilizer strip. And so that was an increase of just about 43% increase in yield. The cost of the fertilizer that we put on amounted to $40, approximately $40, $41 an acre, the 46 pounds of nitrogen. We allowed for a $10 an acre cost of spreading it, so a total cost of putting that fertilizer, that extra 40 pounds or close to 50 pounds of fertilizer out, the cost was $50 an acre. But the yield response produced an additional $225 of fertilizer, just based on hay prices at the time. And so the net return was about $174 per acre. So that's a lot of money to leave on the table, so to speak, for not putting that extra application of fertilizer on.
And actually, Mike, I can share some photos. I pulled up our photo file, which might help
good.
visualize.
Yeah.
So Sarah, if you stop sharing,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I can share.
So do I just click this off?
Oh, you don't have to do anything.
Okay.
And I think it's a neat trial, just like, yeah, just because you were on the ground. And can you see these photos here?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
so this is Jordy Tebow's place where you put down this mid-season application of urea, just to show people what the farm looked like. And as I understand, Mike, you did this with a hand spreader, the second application.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we did it with a hand spreader, and the strip was about 110 feet long and about I think 18 feet wide. And it wasn't I wouldn't say it was outstandingly evident that there was a difference in yield when we looked at it in early September, but we were quite confident that there was a difference in yield. We didn't expect that it would be a difference of an additional 0.9 tons per acre.
Yeah, measuring what your eyes can't see, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
I did
right.
have some questions also, Mike, about like BMPs around mid-season application of urea. And this came from conversations I've been having with Sarah. Just like if producers are putting down mid-season application of urea, and I'm not sure who in this audience today is doing that. Is it important to irrigate immediately after putting down mid-season application, or what would be some sort of management practices you'd want to incorporate with that?
Yeah, you'd want to get water on it as soon as you can. And that's really important because the volatilization losses with the prill sitting on the surface can be substantial. Two ways that you can mitigate that is if you have some crop growth on it before you apply that, then the fertilizer prills are not exposed to air movement, and volatilization losses on urea are in the volatilization losses increase if there's wind and if the wind reaches the surface of the soil and the prill. So in this case, there wouldn't have been any air movement where the prill sat on the surface of the soil. And also if there was any dews from overnight or dews on the crop, especially in the bottom layers, there would be less volatilization losses. Some of the experimental results that I've looked at have indicated that under the worst case scenarios, volatilization losses on urea can be as high as 20% loss. So that's kind of worst case scenario if all of the worst case ducks seem to line up. Obviously, it could be higher than that if it was in extreme conditions. But you need about a quarter of an inch of precipitation at least to put the um, urea in touch with the surface and actually get it down into the surface long enough that it protects it from volatilization losses. So an irrigation pass that is probably somewhere in the vicinity of an inch, maybe an inch and a half of moisture will certainly take care of that. And if you have some light rains that are a quarter of an inch of precipitation or more, and if you have nighttime dews, then you're less susceptible to volatilization losses. So having some cover of crop as opposed to completely bare ground is helpful. And cooler conditions results in less volatilization losses, as does um, uh, high uh, high calcium soils and high pH soils are more susceptible to volatilization losses, which we have those conditions in terms of high calcium magnesium soils and high pHs and sandy soils are very characteristic of East Kootenay soils, and so those conditions are also conditions that increase the potential for volatilization losses. So yes, you can have losses that occur, but um, so you have to, yeah, having the ability to irrigate them is helpful, or pray for rain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. And I think it was really great to see some of the work that the Soil Building Network has done with forage producers in the East Kootenay. And when we started that forage working group, or mostly just a discussion with producers in the East Kootenay, I personally found it really interesting that there was one producer who always does mid-season application of urea. It was that's his practice, whereas others had never done it. Meanwhile, everyone's trying to optimize production. So this really was a trial to help those farmers who don't do mid-season application to see if there could be value to them to do a mid-season application of urea. And without those measurements you took, I don't think we could have really started to answer any of these questions. And whether these farms choose to continue to do mid-season application will be up to them, but they have more information to build on there. And I want to open it to the floor, Mike, but you've spent a lot of time on this trial, which is fantastic, but not often does everyone get to meet one of the key authors in the cost of production for beef in BC. And I think what's really neat about your role with this study is you were one of the researchers in the previous BC cost of production. You use pretty much the same methodology to calculate the cost of production. Whenever it was 10 years ago was the previous one. They do it
Yes.
so you did it 10 years ago, and then you just did it, less than 12 months ago. I was hoping you could maybe comment on maybe two of the key things that resonated with you on the study this year regarding the cost of production in BC for producers for the Kootenay region.
Yeah, two really important key things. The cost of production that we did in 2013 indicated a net return per cow of on the average of the 6 areas that we did in the province, it was about $83, I think, net return per cow. So if you had a 200 cow beef operation, you're handling about 240 to 250 head of animals. and the net return per cow at, say, $100 a cow would be, per brood cow, would be a net return of $20,000. So that's the net income for that beef cattle producer, and it's more than a one-person job. So the returns 10 years ago were well below the poverty level, and that wasn't just a odd bad year. Canfax did a research project that was published in 2022. They looked at the net returns per brood cow for a 30-year period from 1992 to 2022. The net return per cow average over that 30-year period was $110 per cow. So again, $22,000 net income for that 200 brood cow ranch. So there's very little return, very little profitability, very little money to buy groceries, shoes for the kids, and the other things that you have to spend money on. Now, when we did that in 2024, the net return per cow in the 6 areas was just under $700 per cow. So it's about 7 times higher. So we do live in terms of the beef cattle industry in very profitable times. The total reason for that level of profitability is that the cow numbers in US and the cow numbers in Canada are at a record low level. And that has driven up sale prices, the price of beef. But that won't last forever. When the cow herd starts to rebuild in the US, it'll be followed within a few years in Canada. And as the beef cow herd numbers increase, the prices will drop. Hopefully, they'll never get in our lifetime as low as $100 a cow. It will certainly drop well below the $700 a cow that it was in 2024. But it will be so. We have to continue to make our farms more efficient and more profitable, because we'll need that extra income when we have lower prices.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. That was a very succinct summary after you did so much research on that, and you've told me in the past, like, yes, $700 a cow maybe, but the cost of production has also followed suit. So it's not all going into the coffers, so to speak. With that, I would like to provide an opportunity to open the floor. If anybody had a comment or a question, it can just be a general comment if someone has something.
Well, from the chat box,
yeah,
we do have a couple questions over here. So we have from Leanne, how many clip plots thinking stand variability? Which is a very good question because it does come up.
Yeah, well, we clipped paired plots. So we clipped six clippings on the high nitrogen application and 6 paired clippings on the zero nitrogen application. So we clipped a total of 12 plots on the no fertilizer, 6 on the no fertilizer and 6 on the fertilized plots. And again, they were paired, which is a stronger test because basically they're in a pattern on each of those strips that enables the results to be paired.
Great. We got a thumbs up from Leanne. We have another question here from Corey. I was asking Jeff if the spreadsheet was publicly available that was used in the 2024 cost of production study. It would be interesting to personalize it. Mike, do you have access?
Yes, that cost of production was sent out in the advertisement of this program. It was one of the reference pieces of material.
I think
So,
she's asking for a spreadsheet, so not the final report, but maybe a tool that was used to create the report that she could repurpose.
yes, that tool was submitted as part of our contract with the Ministry of Agriculture. So they have the computer analysis that we used for that publication.
Okay.
So is that, yeah, it's quite a substantial piece of computer. Um, uh, I think that what we did is we amalgamated about four different um, computer programs to do the analysis that we did on this program, and those are part of the deliverables of the of the test.
And I'll just add, Mike, to so far I haven't seen a publicly available version of what you had submitted through that. So at the moment, the only one that I'm able to share is the one that has the 2013 data, but we've
Oh,
had this question come up, and so hopefully we can get the new one into hands at some point here.
yeah, the result it was the study was done through the BC Cattlemen's, and so the BC Cattlemen's have a PDF of that publication. It's it's about a, I don't know, 60-page publication, and it provides all of the results from the six different areas of the province, and all of the details and analysis. So I believe that's available by contacting the BC Cattlemen's. They should be able to send you the PDF version of that publication.
Mike, Corey, I was just thinking more about the actual spreadsheet. Like if we could get the Excel spreadsheet and put our own numbers into it so that we
Yeah,
could
well,
actually do our own calculations. That's really what I was asking Jeff about.
yeah, that spreadsheet, it's more than one spreadsheet. It's an amalgamation of two or three different programs, and that was one of the deliverables. So that's available from the ministry. I'm not sure how easy it would be to use that. I think if you were to just use the PDF, you'd be able to the PDF of the study that was done. I think that you could make adjustments from your own operation that would give you your answers. Basically, most of the information is on a per cow basis. So if you have 100 cows instead of 200 cows, you can make those adjustments because it's on a per cow basis. So it had all the basically the input information is in a similar format to what you would submit on a tax return for a farm operation. So you probably would have most of the figures that you'd need, and if you didn't, you could probably make a judgment onto what,
I think Jeff
you know.
was saying that like um, the 2013 study, that spreadsheet is available. So maybe you can just use that, Corey, the 2013 spreadsheet.
Yeah, maybe I can just update
Yeah.
the numbers and adapt it. That would be great.
Yeah. And Leanne Colombo was just building on that, saying, were producers given, and this I'm interpreting Leanne's question, but were producers given a spreadsheet to fill in? And I
No.
believe they were not. No, they went to a meeting and you filled in spreadsheets for them.
Yeah, we canvassed the participants at the meeting to come to a consensus on what would be the normal costs and returns for a normal ranch in that area.
And Rick Taggart has a question. So go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, good evening, all. Maybe Mike and possibly Doug can comment on fertigation. I'm interested in what's involved, how expensive it is to get started, and then because the returns after you're finished, once you're up and running.
Yeah, well, maybe we can let Doug take us away on this question here because he's the one with the most experience.
You bet. Yeah, I'd really like to hear that from Doug. Yeah.
Oh. Being put on the spot here, Rachel.
Oh, you're good at it.
So the cost of my system wasn't very much on top of the center pivot because the pump itself, I believe when I got it probably 5 years ago, was about $4,500, $4,000, somewhere in there. It pumps at about 20 gallons per hour. So when I'm mixing up fertilizer, I'll put in about a third of a bag of nitrogen. So about whatever that would be, uh, in about 300 gallons of water. And then I keep adding water to end up with probably about 550 to 500 gallons of mix. And I just circulate the fertilizer and water with a 3-inch Honda trash pump. So I just have it sucking out of the bottom of the tank and blowing in the top, and it just keeps circulating. So you're just wait for it to mix. And I usually hold the fertilizer bag over my water tank and slowly let it in, because if you do get too much fertilizer and it sucks, it'll fill the whole hose up and plug everything up, and it's a bit of a mess. Um, and it's interesting, as it gets up to concentration, it starts making the pump quite cold, and it'll actually make almost like ice on the pump itself, which so you're pretty much making like liquid nitrogen. I think you can go up to about like, I mean, urea is 32%, I believe. So you can't go above that in concentration. So all I do is on a field, I just put on, like I know it's going to use 20 gallons per hour. So if I have 200 gallons of mix, I just plan on getting across the field in 10 hours. So it's not super scientific on how much I'm putting on, but I've really noticed, like if I put a ton of fertilizer on a cornfield, and if the corn is up, say 3 feet tall, if you went out there, drove across the field, you'd run over a bunch of corn, and you would, if you put that ton out, you just in granular form, even if you irrigated in, you just don't get much result from it. Like you wouldn't notice a very visual change in the corn crop. Like if it was looking a little bit yellow, it wouldn't necessarily turn a whole bunch greener on a 25-acre field. With the liquid nitrogen, if you put that same ton of fertilizer, so that would be 3 tanks of mix on that same 25-acre field, you get a very visual response to that fertilizer. I also like how you can do it, which that was one of my questions I was thinking of. Uh, with corn, it actually likes its nitrogen when it's about to tassel. So it's better if you're fertigating when that corn's 4 or 5 feet tall, which you wouldn't want to do. Like I never wanted to do before because I was running over too much crop. But now I'm able to fertilize when that corn really needs it. And the big advantage of that too is because in the spring, we can I used to put quite a bit of nitrogen down with the seed with the corn, but if we get a cool, wet spring, and nothing's growing, you just lose that fertilizer. But if it's in season when things are growing hard, it's just an awesome system. I haven't done much like mixing of phosphorus or other, like we're just doing the 4600 because it dissolves really well. And then I'm putting my starter fertilizer, phosphorus, and potassium with the corn seed when I plant it in the spring. So that's kind of the quick and easy. But I really think some numbers I've seen, they say a pound of fertigated on fertilizer is worth 4 pounds of uh, broadcast on, and I think I think it's at least 4 times more efficient in volume of crop you get and use of that fertilizer.
Is your hookup into the pivot from the tank a Venturi, or is it pumped in?
It has a little. It's called a twill. So I have power at each center point that runs the pump, and it kind of pulses it into the water stream, so it spreads it out very evenly in the stream of water. So it's just a very fine nozzle, but it just sprays. It goes psh, psh, and it's at fairly high pressure, and it just gives us like a pumping action as it sprays in there.
Okay, good. Thanks, Doug.
Sarah was wondering if you get any plugging of the lines or anything, or I guess I'm guessing the nitrogen is pretty clean, so you don't.
Yeah, the pump, it's an Agra inject pump, and it's got a fairly good, like a little filter. So every like second or so tank, I'll clean that filter out because sometimes there is some impurities. But no, it seems to work very well.
And I'm guessing, Doug, that you're rinsing out the tanks and everything pretty thoroughly after. So it's not like in a greenhouse where the tank is sitting with nutrients in the water for a long time. Is that right?
Yeah, like no, and I'm flushing it, and we sort of rotate around between different pivots. So when we're fertigating, we're sort of refilling that like it's being used all the time. It does, if you leave it out in the sun and don't use it for 2 weeks, it starts growing some funky green stuff. And
Yeah, and I guess where that's coming from, when we had the cohort meet up in the East Kootenays, this question came up a bunch, and certainly issues around algae growth, but then like you mentioned with the phosphorus products, like whether that's precipitating out and causing, which can be pH related, whatever else is in your water. So that'll be very interesting if you start to experiment with those things.
yeah, and we've done a few like where I've bought liquid fertilizer in a 1-ton tote, and that is mixed, and I think that's a very good way to do it. It's just that I'm slightly cheap, and the nitrogen is definitely cheaper if I mix it myself.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for going on the spot. But we get lots of questions about fertigation, and it's we learn from the farmers because you're the one doing it. So it's great, and we're really happy that many farms in our region actually have been successful with pivot funding in the last 2 years with that increase in irrigation infrastructure. So I have a feeling there's like more opportunities for producers to experiment with the pivot pivot irrigation, not pivot irrigation, pivot fertigation. But yeah, and I kind of wanted to also just mention during this call that, you know, we're at the beginning of really starting this like forage working group, and many of the farmers on this call today, you're already sort of you're maximizing your production because you know the value and the necessity of your farm. And we are continually looking for ways to encourage and support maybe new entrants or folks who are looking to optimize to learn from other farms. Then we do that best usually through field days to look and see what good fields look like. And I mean, there's so much that goes into this, from rejuvenation cycles to varietals, and then whether you have wildlife pressure or not. And we know that there's many factors involved in there. And I did have in all of this context, many farmers, all of them, are relying on fertilizer dealers in order to receive their fertilizer recommendations. As we know, it's one of the highest bills you pay of the year. So my question to Lindsay and Mike is, what are the most important questions? And I'll like two. What are the two most important questions you should be asking your fertilizer dealer? Lindsay?
I was hoping Mike would talk first.
I know you were, so I'm putting you on this one. Or Mike can go first if you want, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, very, very good. Very, very good question. Thanks for that. Yes, I think it's really important that you get from your fertilizer dealer the cost of the base ingredients that are going to go into your blend. So that's usually the cost per ton of urea, the cost per ton of 1150, 1152 or 1151, the cost of 0060, the cost of 1420, 20% sulfur, I guess, and the cost of 2100, 20 of sulfur. And in addition to that, the cost of boron and the cost of a sulfur source of sulfur like borate or I don't know what they're called. There's one called Solubor 90 or something like that. So the cost of those basic ingredients that go into your blend, the reason for that is that then you can calculate the cost per pound of NPK, S, and boron. And that's very important when you're making a decision about what the various levels of nutrients you're putting in. Because, for example, you know that the yield response to nitrogen, if it's an alfalfa grass stand, if you're using nitrogen in that stand because there's some grass in it, it's really important to know the relative cost of nitrogen, for example, compared to phosphate, because you know that your response from nitrogen is going to be a very steep response curve, and it's going to go up for a very long period of time. Whereas the yield response from phosphorus is it goes up almost as fast, but it levels off really, really quickly at fairly low levels of phosphorus. So it's really important to know that information in the process of developing your blend. And most fertilizer dealers have no idea what the cost of the different nutrients are. And so when they're developing a blend for you, they're probably not weighing the yield response from certain nutrients versus others. It's very important not to go overboard with phosphorus, but it's going overboard with nitrogen is much more forgiving because you're going to still get a very high yield response even at fairly high levels of nitrogen vis-a-vis the phosphorus, for example. So that's one of the most important things. You also want to know what the cost of if the fertilizer dealer is going to charge you something for deliveries to the farm, for example, or if you're using a fertilizer spreader from them, you want to know what its costs, what those auxiliary costs are, so that you can separate them out from the fertilizer costs. So I think those are two of the really most important ones. And often they don't give you that information. They just say, well, yeah, I'll deliver it to the farm and it'll be so much a ton.
Thank you, Mike.
Of
words
the
of wisdom.
Product.
Lindsay,
Make them work for your business.
And I think my answer would, I guess, be adding the agronomic parts on top of that. So just making sure that the blend is based on your soil test and what is needed, as well as like it's based on the expected yield that you'll have. So making sure you have that conversation with your fertilizer provider, that you're meeting those needs, and that it's available when you need it on your farm too, because that sometimes could be a challenge, is availability as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. Jeff says a couple upcoming webinars from our nutrient management team on topics similar. Okay, so Jeff's promoting. Jeff, do you want to give a little plug there?
Sorry, it's just propaganda, Rachel. Yeah, just if you're keen on this format and these types of discussions, our nutrient management team is hosting a couple different webinars this winter during the daytime compared to our evening soil discussions. But these one of them is really just that, like how to interpret your soil test report if you want to sort of walk through what that process looks like. And then the other one that's noted there is about sort of how do you go from some of that information into crop nutrient requirements and recommendations. So,
Great.
yeah.
Well, thank you for the propaganda, Jeff. And yeah, I don't see any more questions. And I think this plug is that, we're always looking for ways that we can share information about forage production in the Kootenays. It's a challenging environment, and many great minds together can help make progress in a sector that is somewhat isolated because of our geographic distance from each other. For example, Rick Taggart is probably 500 kilometers away from Doug Fawson. So, in Rock Creek, so Rock Creek versus Radium, but still kind of small plot forage production, compared to like large areas like northern BC or like the whole prairie area. And my continual plug to share information with ministry now with Lindsay in her position. It's great for government staff to hear what farms are doing and their practices. We often think they know, but they often would like to hear more about production practices because it helps inform their work. So I'm sure Lindsay agrees to that. She pick up the phone, talk through it, and love to learn more about farms.
Yeah, definitely. And I can share my contact information with Rachel. So if anybody is welcome to reach out by email or give me a call. Either's fine.
That's awesome. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to share my final slide, but it doesn't really matter if I share it or not. And by all means, ideas for field days this coming season, we'd love to hear from you. And we're just really happy that you joined us on this evening tonight, because we're trying to build capacity with our soil discussion series. We really enjoy hearing what people's questions are, and we're going to, keep doing more soil events, hopefully this growing season. So with that, good luck, I guess, calving for those who have started calving or who are anticipating calving coming. And yeah, thank you.
And Rachel, I want to try playing a sound clip from Jordy Tebow. I don't know if this is going to work, but he sent me a WhatsApp message today. So tell me if you hear this audio.
Hey, Sarah, I'm not sure if this message will reach you in time, but I thought this was the quickest, easiest.
Okay, can you put it closer to your computer or make it louder?
It's playing from the computer, but let me see if I can turn up the volume. Ooh, that might be peak volume,
Okay,
unfortunately.
we'll give it a shot. Play it anyways,
Okay.
and we can all strain our ears. So this was Jordy who did the strip
Oh,
trial.
I found a way to increase it. Okay, you guys ready? This might blast now.
My thoughts on the soil building and FERT experiment that we did at my place. I think my opinion is that the results speak for themselves. If you look at the data that you and Mike collected, and just the visual differences that we could see at home there while changing irrigation and stuff, I feel that the extra FERT was more than we got better results than what I had anticipated. So definitely worth it. The other thing I would like to add is that when it comes to building soil, if you're building soil through management intensive grazing, for instance, your best soil building scenario is to graze it
intensely enough that you can trample a lot of the standing forage into the soil along with the manure and everything. And it's difficult to do that if you don't have enough material on the surface. So, even according to Steve Kenyon, if you want to get a jump start on it, you need to apply fertilizer to get some top growth so that you've got some material to work with in order to build soil quicker. And when it comes to putting up baled forage of one type or another, it costs just about the same money to drive that tractor around on a 1.5 ton crop as it does a 3 ton crop. So you want to cut your expenses per ton of forage. You want to maximize the production on every field that you're running that equipment around on. So anyway, I just thought I would add my 2 cents worth. Hopefully it reaches you in time, and if not, well, then we'll have it for another one. Everything is nice here in New Zealand. We're getting an awful lot of rain, but today happens to be sunny, and we're on our way to a 3-day dog trial to watch my daughter compete in some New Zealand dog trials. Hope you're having a great winter, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Well, right from New Zealand. That was fantastic. Thank you for making that work. So Jordy was the farm that participated in the urea strip trial. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And I will allow for closing comments too. And I noticed Devin Chersonoff is on this call, and he participated in a case study last year, and it's not published yet because we're just doing our final edits, but he shares a full cost breakdown on what it takes for him to incorporate cover crops and grazing into his perennial forage rejuvenation cycles. And so we'll have that live within the next couple weeks, and we're really excited to share that out, and we'll hopefully host another event like this where Devin and the participants who did the cover cropping work can share out their results. I see Greg Evans is also on this call, so he incorporated cover crops into orchard preparation, and so he will also hopefully be able to share that out when those are live in a couple weeks. So I'll also make a point to email this list those studies. So thank you. No further comments? Everybody, enjoy your evening.
Thanks, everybody. Good job.